And today we're looking at handling complaints, a letting agent's lesson on engaging with TPO. Particular shout out and thanks to everybody at Property Industry Eye who gave this story top billing in their newsletter today. And as usual, everything today is for general information purposes only. It is not and must not be construed as legal advice or official guidance. So please bear that in mind throughout. But the purpose of today is to give you insights from the TPO's perspective and from the perspective of someone who's been through one of the adjudication processes with TPO on what you can do to avoid going through adjudication, how to manage the process of adjudication, how it all works. So we're trying to demystify adjudication and show that this can be a collaborative approach and really underlining the things within lettings businesses that can help problems from starting and resolving them once they've come up. And with that in mind, I'd like our guests to introduce themselves. So Zoe, over to you.
Hi, I'm Zoe Bywater. I'm the Director of Lettings at Belvoir Bedford. I've been doing that for the past 18 years. And this is probably the first time I've been through the mill with a complaint that's gone to the Ombudsman.
Brilliant, thank you. And Siobhan, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Siobhan Fennell. I'm Interim Deputy Ombudsman at the Property Ombudsman, who I joined in January this year from my previous role as Head Ombudsman with the Legal Ombudsman. And prior to that, I was Risk Manager with a large national firm of solicitors. And prior to that, worked in the regulatory sector. So I've got about 20 years experience of dispute resolution and the regulatory sector. I'm really looking forward to sharing some information with you today about how we can support you to successfully engage with a complaint to TPO.
Brilliant, thank you. And thank you both very much for giving up your time in preparing for and being on today's webinar. Hopefully the audience will find it useful. Just as a note again to the audience, please, if you've got any questions, comments or insights, please do submit them via the Q&A function. And we've allocated 15 minutes at the end for any questions that you might have. And my colleague Remy will be moderating those. And if you could take 10 seconds at the end of the webinar just to provide us with a short bit of feedback on today's webinar, that would also be hugely well received. Thank you. And so today we're going to look at the adjudication process, recording works and processes, handling complaints, and then coming to audience questions. And so starting at the very top, Siobhan, could you tell us a bit about the TPO, the codes of practice, how consumers engage with TPO, the sort of casework that you have coming across the organisation, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are an ombudsman scheme, so we're members of the Ombudsman Association, and as such we comply with a number of requirements about our governance arrangements and the rigour of our decision making. The service we provide is free of charge for consumers, and we're non-profit making. So all our membership fees go back into resolving complaints and supporting agents in resolving those complaints and addressing underlying dissatisfaction and overall improving trust and confidence in the sector. As an ombudsman scheme, we work impartially and independently to resolve and determine complaints by looking at the information that's made available to us by both parties. We don't take sides, we're not a consumer champion, and we're not a regulator. So the Property Ombudsman deals with around 40,000 inquiries a year. So that's inquiries by phone, email and website. And that's where we provide an advice and support service. So, for example, we might be explaining to consumers how to use an agent's own internal complaints process, or we might be explaining the role of the first tier tribunal, or we might be signposting relevant organisations who can support where we're unable to. So, for example, that might be referring people to local or national trading standards. So those are the inquiries we deal with each year. And then out of those 40,000 inquiries, we go on to accept around 5,000 to 5,500 complaints a year. So they're complaints that have already been through an agent's complaints procedure and haven't been resolved at that stage. And of those complaints we accept for consideration, around 50% relate to lettings, 30% to sales, and 20% to leasehold management. The key causes of lettings complaints into the Property Ombudsman are the management of the lettings process, so issues like delay, poor communication and record keeping, issues with instructions and terms of business, and poor complaints handling. So I think the really interesting point here is it doesn't tend to be complex issues that are the key causes of complaint. It's often customer service fundamentals. The positive thing I think about this is that these issues are relatively straightforward for any agent to address and to prevent. So that's the type of issues we're tending to deal with day to day. When we're looking at a complaint, what we're looking at is whether an agent has complied with the obligations they have under the relevant code. And most relevant for us today is the Property Ombudsman Code for lettings agents, which you can access on our website. And we'll also look at whether an agent has complied with any relevant legal obligations. So the code is a key reference document for you as agents if you're reviewing your own compliance processes or dealing with a complaint yourselves, because that's how we will look at a complaint that comes into us. So if we receive a complaint about your agency into us, we will let you know about that as soon as the complaint is received, and we'll also let you know what information we need from you. The information that we'll ask for will be specific to the complaint, and so it will differ depending on the nature of the complaint received. So, for example, if it's a complaint from a landlord about communication around rent arrears, we might ask for the rent schedule and the communication with the parties about those arrears. So the information we request tends to be specific. We will always ask to see your final substantive complaint response that you've sent under your own internal complaints procedure. That allows us to determine whether the complaint is something that we can accept. And it's also really helpful for us in understanding why the complaint's been escalated to us and to help us to start off our investigation. So that's kind of the first stage of what we do. Once we've accepted that complaint in, we will always seek to help the complainant and the agent reach an informal resolution wherever we can. So we do that by looking at the issues with the parties, trying to explore what the preferred outcome is, and if possible, to help the parties agree an informal resolution. And that informal resolution might be as simple as us helping to provide some additional information about what's happened and what's led to the complaint, and some reassurance to a consumer that the approach the agent has taken is reasonable and is fair. Alternatively, we might help the parties agree a financial resolution. So that's our preferred approach, is early informal resolution. So I think it's important to be aware of that. And if you get communication from the Property Ombudsman, get in touch with us, engage early, provide the information we're asking for, because our aim will always be to try and resolve that matter informally without it going straight to an Ombudsman decision, if we can do that. If it isn't possible to achieve an early resolution, that's when we'll go on to adjudicate a complaint. So what that means is one of our adjudication team will look at the information that's been provided by both parties about the complaint. If they need to, they might get in touch with the agent to request further information from the file or further comment on a particular issue to ensure that they can fully understand what's happened and reach a fair and reasoned decision about whether there's been any breach of the code or any other obligation, to be able to explain that. And then if there is a breach of the code and we reach that determination, we then go on to look at, has that had any impact for the complainant? If we decide there has been an impact, and that might be either financial loss or some distress or inconvenience caused, we'll then look at an appropriate remedy for that impact. And the adjudicator's role is to explain all of that in their proposed decision to the parties. So it's not about just coming up with a remedy or an explanation of why the complaint isn't supported, but it's explaining to both parties why we've reached the decision we have and the information we've based that decision making on. So the parties that will then receive that proposed decision in writing, and they have the option of accepting at that stage, and that might be the end of the matter. If it's not accepted at that stage, either party can decide to reject and make representations if they think there's been an error or if they think there's further evidence that hasn't been accepted. once those representations are considered by another member of our staff, a final ombudsman decision is made. And if that final ombudsman decision is accepted by the complainant, it then becomes binding on the agent. So that's a really quick whiz through of the Property Ombudsman, what we do and how our process works.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much. And in terms of the sort of demystifying the process, that end-to-end explanation, not just of what it is, but why and how, hopefully has been really useful to the audience. Just one note on that, one comment is, you said that you accept 5,500 complaints a year. That's a phenomenal caseload. I hadn't quite appreciated the scale there. And just a question, just for clarification, is the process you've described the same in Scotland, England, Wales? Is it the same process across each of the countries?
Yes, so where our terms of reference apply, and obviously our scheme only applies to members of our scheme, but where the scheme applies, then it's the same, apart from there were some slight differences in relation to timescales, but generally that overall process remains the same.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you. And Zoe, this webinar came out of your very kind suggestion that you'd been through a recent experience with TPO and you thought that by sharing it more widely, it could help other people. So with that in mind, could you tell us about your recent experience of dealing with TPO? Was it your first escalated complaint? And having heard the process overview from Siobhan, how did the process work from your perspective?
Okay, it was our first real sort of complaint. I'd had a few minor things happen in the past, but this was like the first meaty one, if you want to call it that. I just want to sort of touch on the headline that was in Property Eye this morning, where it said we welcome complaints. And I just want to say, I don't think any of us as agents welcome a complaint. We were absolutely mortified when we received it because we didn't think that that was going to happen. But obviously you have to turn a negative into a positive, and that's what I want to try and do today. As you know, good agents will get complaints, and I think we need to sort of be aware of that, is that you may be the best agent, but you cannot please everybody all of the time. And it might be that it's the individual and their perception that is the issue and not necessarily you as the agent. I mean, today I'm not going to give away any silver bullets, but what I'm hoping I can do is just sort of maybe just refocus people's minds in terms of what they need to be thinking about and when they need to be thinking about it. A colleague of mine did ask me when I was talking to him about this, was it because the way in which you presented your evidence to the Ombudsman that meant you got this positive outcome? And I actually said, no, it wasn't. We actually had to go right back, strip it right back to basics. And one of the things is you have to have the right processes in place. So one of the things I wanted to say is this is my friend and all my processes focus on this. So obviously then you know if you've got it right in the beginning when you're training and inducting your new staff and continuously, you know, auditing their training, you've got that as your benchmark, and that helped me no end. The way that we did it is I'm obviously a member of Isla Property Mark, and we used their complaints procedure. So we did try our best and try and resolve the situation by using that complaints procedure. And we did issue what we call our final viewpoint letter to the complainant. But unfortunately, that wasn't enough at the time, and it obviously took it to the next level. And we've had a really positive experience, if you can call it that, with our dealings with the Ombudsman, who has been very receptive and as helpful as they can be, being an independent body. But you never felt like you were on trial or anything like that. So it's been a good, positive experience.
Excellent, thank you. And I've just noticed a couple of people asking for a close-up on the leaflet or the code of practice that you held up. So that is the TPO Code of Practice for Residential Letting Agents, available in hard copy and also available from the TPO website. So if you are a TPO member, I would strongly encourage you after this webinar, if you don't have copies, to access them. And as Zoe said, to use that as the basis of your processes. So effectively mirroring your processes of what is expected within the Code of Practice, and also look at your internal complaints handling procedure. For Isla Property Mark members, please do check out the Isla Property Mark complaints handling process. And so, Zoe, I'm going to stick with you. Thank you very much for the overview of what you went through. one of the challenges or questions I think that comes up is it takes a huge amount of time and effort potentially to prepare appropriately for an adjudication. So what kind of evidence and documents were you asked to provide? Did you have any trouble producing them? If not, why not? If so, why? Could you give any colour having been through the process?
I mean, fortunately, the Ombudsman does give you a list as a guide, and what they want ideally is everything pertaining to that particular complaint. Now, it might be that there's several sections of that complaint and you need to look at each section. But like I said, they give you a list. But what the key things they want are your tenancy file copies and any related documentation. So it could be inventories, your tenancy agreements, checkout reports, check-in reports, correspondence in relation to any negotiations you've had, any reports on property visits, and also if it's a maintenance issue, which I think is one of the things that is complained about quite a bit, is having an audit trail for that. And we were very fortunate, obviously, Fixflo webinar, that helped us because we had an issue with maintenance and we had a good, clear, dated audit trail that obviously we picked up from Fixflo. One of the key things is it's about providing evidence and illustrating proof of that evidence. I'm very fortunate that past life I worked in a police control room, and one of the key things there is you have to record everything. So I'm probably a little bit more OCD about it and always banging on about file notes and making sure every member of staff makes them at the right time. And I think it's one of the things that we probably forget about more frequently. And what I found since I've sort of done some refresher training with the staff is they now acknowledge and appreciate the reason why we expect it. And I think it's like I said earlier, it's like going back to basics about when you're training your staff in terms of how they should answer the phone, and what the first thing they should do is open that tenant record and start typing. Or if it's a recorded call, make a note of the date and the time and make a note of that. Because it's not until something like this happens you realise the value of having that information. And then obviously talking about how we've dealt with the Ombudsman. Obviously, I don't know if the viewers know that you used to work in law. You know what it's like getting a file bundled together. And imagine dropping that onto the desk of the Ombudsman and saying, right, find your way through all of that. I can't imagine the number of emails that I sent through, but I had to obviously content, and reference this. So it was so easy for the Ombudsman to then find the relevant pieces of information. If you just send 50 emails, they've got to try and wade their way through that. And like I say, I was very fortunate because of the way I've got the processes in place already, that it was still time consuming, but it's still quite easy to find that information.
Brilliant, thank you. And so you referred to my past career as a lawyer, so it's sort of defensive practice. It's not just doing the right thing, but being able to show you have done the right thing. And so I guess, Siobhan, the TPO has some very strong views, and I think you're probably going to go back to your codes of practice on this in terms of what ought to and must be recorded. So what are the types of evidence that are commonly requested in an adjudication? What should agents be recording and documenting? And I guess sort of perhaps open it up to a little bit of speculation on your part or Zoe's, depending on how you both feel about it, as to what extent is that documentation and evidence being routinely gathered by agents. So Siobhan, what are your views and the TPO's views on documentation and evidence?
Well, I'd really echo everything Zoe's just said in terms of kind of her approach to engaging with the Ombudsman. So kind of being organised, being prepared, clearly explaining the documentation that you're sending through to the Property Ombudsman and why you're sending it through. So that's, a super helpful kind of organised approach, which is great. In terms of the requirements, so agents are required to keep clear and full written records of their relationship with landlords and tenants for 6 years. So that's our expectation. The expectation of that means that if we request information as an Ombudsman for us to be able to determine a decision, we will expect that evidence to be available. And when we're reaching our decisions, like any Ombudsman scheme, we reach that decision on the balance of probabilities. So if we've got that information from your file, it is much easier for us to be able to reach a decision. In the absence of it, what it means is we will consider the explanation provided by a complainant and the information provided by you. And often the complainant will have their own records. They will have kept the emails and the invoices and the references. And if the complainant is able to put forward information and the agent is not, then on balance, we may well be persuaded by the complainant's evidence. So it's in the agent's interest to be able to provide a full record. That's in relation to dealing with TPO. I would also say it's in the agent's interest to be able to have those full records to deal with a complaint internally, like Zoe described, to be able to go back to your phone records or your file notes or whatever it is, means that when you come to respond to that complainant, rather than just saying, well, I don't support your complaint or I don't agree, what you're able to do is to be able to go back and say, I've looked at this document, and this document, and what it shows is this. And that's why I've decided that I'm unable to support your complaint or I don't agree. And that makes it much more likely that your response is going to be persuasive and to resolve that complaint at an early stage. I also think there's an additional kind of benefit in terms of things like staff handover or unexpected staff absence. So if you've got good record keeping practices, and if you have an unexpected staff absence or somebody leaves, at a time you weren't expecting, it allows really effective client handover and means that issues don't get lost between different members of staff. So it's really helpful for that reason as well. In terms of the information we will request, like I said before, we will request that final viewpoint letter and your complaints handling information. But like Zoe described, the particular documents we will look for will very much depend on the nature of the complaint that's been raised with us, but usually will involve requesting your communication with a tenant or a landlord or prospective tenant about the issues that have been raised. In terms of kind of the query about, is information always there? I would say generally most agents are able to provide the information that we're looking for and do have that available, but that's not always the case. So we do still have instances fairly frequently of key documentation going missing, which is problematic. So for example, we do have instances of a signed tenancy agreement not being available or terms of business not being available, and then that makes it difficult both for the agent to deal with an internal complaint and for us to reach a decision. So I'd really support what Zoe says about kind of that organised and methodical approach to record keeping.
Brilliant, thank you. I take quite a simplistic view of this, which is there are three elements and you can't have any of them missing. So people, so great people who've been appropriately trained, the processes that make the business run, and then the products, technology typically, which allows you to easily and accurately capture data. If any one of those is missing, you've got some real challenges. You as a business may have done the right thing, but being able to evidence it will be time consuming and potentially fraught with challenges. So having great people, great processes, and the right products that capture the right data, so you're not reliant on different people's inboxes or notes on scraps of paper. And I'm not saying that this is particularly common, although it does occur, or even writing things on whiteboards and then wiping them at the end of the week. I have seen that. And just imagine you were in front of an adjudicator, imagine something went wrong. How easily would you be able to get the information together that they would reasonably expect in order for you to be able to show you've done the right thing? Zoe, I'm just going to sort of turn to you now and say, lots of people across the sector. Of those, so people, product, processes, are there any one or more that you think typically agents are falling short on from what you see?
I think one of the things I sort of forget to mention in the previous section, which is relevant to this as well, is you've touched on it already. It is to do with having the right software. There are software packages out there that will not carry out a full audit trail of what you're doing. So when you as an independent business, you need to be considering that, okay, it's not going to be a problem until it's a problem. But I think just make sure that the software that you're looking at does do that. I know for a fact that I've had to go back 6+ years on Fixflo and found answers to questions, and the sense of achievement when you do that is absolutely awesome. Talking about other agents, it's very difficult to know because I try and say I am what I would say an exceptional agency, and most people in my circles probably are too, but we're not perfect, and staff and ourselves will get sloppy from time to time. So it's just about, for me, training your team regularly and making sure that you're refreshing them and making sure that it's still in their minds. And don't get to the point of getting a complaint like we did. Test your systems now. Test them. Pretend, mock-up complaint. The Ombudsman have these really excellent case studies, where you can be the Ombudsman. Try that out for size. Give your staff a list of documentation that you want them to get their hands on. I'm fortunate as being part of a franchise that we get audited annually, and obviously being an ALA member as well, ALA audit our processes as well. So I'm fortunate in that respect, but if you don't have that facility, it might be something that you want to consider, creating a list of documentation that you think is essential if you were to get a complaint, and see if you can get your hands on them now, rather now than further down the line when it could be costly financially and obviously time-wise, rushing around like a headless chicken trying to find something that you're never going to find because, like you say, it's been wiped off the board or it's been shredded or whatever. So do it now, and understanding the implications if you've not got those processes in place.
Brilliant, thank you. And Zoe, I think we've had a brilliant overview of the process from Siobhan and a great insight from you on what you went through in terms of collating data and your experience. I'd like to turn to the third theme of today's webinar, which is avoiding escalations to the TPO. So what do you do when a customer first mentions the word complaint or redress or escalation or any of those sorts of terms? What do you tell your team to do as part of a de-escalation process? So what have you built into your business to avoid things ending up in the 5,500 cases a year accepted by the TPO?
As I've said, we don't want complaints. None of us want to have a complaint. And, for me, this has been a learning curve as well, but validates what we do have in place. We work very, very hard to build relationships with our clients. And one of the things is, I'm instilling on the team constantly about keeping the communication going and being effective and not just contacting people when bad stuff happens. I think, unfortunately, when you get to the words complaint or ombudsman, I think it's going to be very difficult because you've already reached that point where if they're using those words, you probably past the point of not necessarily no return, but the relationship's already starting to break down. We do try and do some conflict resolution training within the office just to try and deal with situations, to try and de-escalate. But like I said earlier, you're not going to please everybody. But if you do get to that point, be transparent. Don't shy away. Don't be worried about if they do want the complaints procedure. I mean, sometimes people will mention the word, you send them a procedure, they reflect, and they come back to you and there's not a problem. 18 years, and this is the first time I've really had a serious complaint. So, it doesn't happen often, but it's just, like I say, it's just trying to minimise, getting to that level. But don't be afraid if you can't resolve the situation, because like I say, you can't please everybody.
Just one follow up on that. So people complain or escalate for different reasons. Some people want financial recompense, some people want an apology, some people don't care about either of those things but just want to make sure that whatever has happened won't happen again. Do you go through any sort of process internally in trying to identify what the motivation is, or any form of training around that?
Yeah, we do. I mean, it's one of the things I think sometimes that comes with age and experience, but I try and instill that on the rest of the team. And we do we have morning meetings where we discuss things that have happened during the day, and we'll look at the reasons behind that. Again, it's going back to, it's about building the relationship with your clients. So by the time it gets to that point, you probably already know the motivation. Unfortunately, we know we're in a world where there are what I would call professional complainers that are always no matter what you do or say, they're going to go down that road with you. But I would hope that because of the relationships we've built as a team with our clients, it's a very, very rare occasion that would happen.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And then just as a reminder to the audience, please, if you've got any questions, this is your chance to ask them, because we're going into the audience Q&A shortly. So hit the Q&A button. Any comments, insights, questions, anything you would like to share, please enter them now, or forever hold your peace. And I guess, Siobhan, over to you. Is there anything else agents should consider when trying to resolve complaints, what's your view of early engagement? Could you please talk us through that, please?
Absolutely. So it was lovely to hear Zoe's comments there about how committed she is in her agency to resolving complaints effectively. And that's our experience of most agents, that, you know, you've invested an awful lot in getting those clients in the first place, and you don't want to lose them. And you want to resolve that complaint effectively to ensure that your good PR remains intact. So that's, you know, that's great to see that level of commitment. Couple of things I'd add around what Zoe said. So that effective complaints process, I'd really have a think about how visible that is to your clients. Put it on your website, make sure it's there in your documents. Everybody in your office, do they know how to share that information and how to respond if someone expresses dissatisfaction? There can be a tendency maybe to shy away a little bit from making that complaints information visible, but I don't think having the information available makes people complain. What it does is it means where people are dissatisfied, they're more likely to let you know, and they're more likely to let you know at an earlier stage. And what that means is you can get that issue resolved quickly before it escalates and before that dissatisfaction really sets in. So I think that's definitely one to have a look at. And I think Zoe's sort of commitment there to ensuring effective training and that everybody in the office really understands what they need to do where they get a complaint is great. I'm really supportive of early engagement, and particularly of getting on the phone where you can. It's much more effective to try and have a discussion with the complainant about what their concerns are and try and put their mind at rest at an early stage. Sometimes it's really tempting to leave that long complaint email to the end of the day. You almost want to put it in a drawer and forget about it. That is really the worst thing to do. Get that complaint out first thing in the morning, look at it, get on the phone and try and sort it out. You really maximise your chances of getting an early resolution the quicker you can get involved. The other thing I'd say as well is linking through the information we were giving about having those good records and responding to complaints, is that piece around explaining why you've come to the view you have in relation to a complaint. So that early resolution, when you're providing your response, it allows you to give that detail. You know, I've looked at these maintenance records and what I've found is X, Y, and Z, or I've looked at our communication with you in relation to the arrears and I can see that what we've explained is this, this, and this. So really being able to go back and explain the documentation you've looked at and what you've done to consider the complainant's concerns and to address them is really helpful. It instills kind of trust and confidence in your complaints handling, and again makes it more likely that you'll get that early resolution. So that's a really helpful thing to do. And a couple of other things. So one thing we tend to see is a real difference between the understanding of the lettings process between the complainant and the lettings agent. And as a lettings agent, you kind of live and breathe that process all day long. You understand it kind of from beginning to end, and anything that happens in between is kind of, it's your bread and butter, it's what you're doing every day. Often the complainant will not understand that process in anywhere near that level of detail. So it's really important just to take that step back and have a look at, is there anything you need to explain about how the process works? So often, for example, we're explaining things like the role of the lettings agent and the limit of that role as compared to the responsibilities of the landlord and how those differ, and what the limitations of what the agent is able to do for somebody versus the responsibilities of the landlord, for example. So it's just remembering to bear in mind that the complainant will have a very different level of understanding, and do go back and explain those basics, because that can be really helpful in getting a resolution. Being heard and being taken seriously tend to mean a lot to complainants, and that ties in with getting on the phone early. So it's not always about the end of the process and the resolution, but it's about being listened to and feeling that the agent is taking the complaint seriously and has understood it. And again, that goes a long way to ultimately getting a successful resolution and the complainant not escalating to the Property Ombudsman. The other thing as well is around the emotion in complaints. So often there is an awful lot of emotion on the part of the complainant attached to the complaint. And it's really important to recognise the level of that emotion. Even if you consider the complaint is unjustified, it's really helpful to recognise that emotion. It helps to de-escalate the situation before you move on to looking at a possible resolution or giving a response to the complaint. And I think the other thing as well is also to recognise your own emotion in responding to a complaint. So often when you get a complaint, you can feel a bit attacked, you can feel defensive, and it can be tempting to kind of fire off quite a defensive email saying, you know, we worked incredibly hard for you, you know, put a lot into this matter. It's important to kind of recognise that emotion, perhaps wait an hour before you send that email, ask somebody else in your office to read it, have a think about if you were sending a complaint response to a relative or to a friend, would you use that same tone? Would you use that same language? Because that tone and language is really important in helping to build that trust and confidence and get that early resolution. And I guess the other thing is, if you are identifying a shortcoming in your service, so if you find actually something isn't of the standard we usually aim to provide or you'd like to provide, acknowledge that and apologise. And then go on to have a look at it. Has there been any loss caused? Has there been any distress and inconvenience? If there has, then have a discussion with the person bringing the complaint about what they're looking for in terms of a resolution. I think that's it for me, and hopefully that's helpful in terms of some tips of you know, getting those early resolutions and preventing things needing to come through to us, which is ultimately what we would like. We would like to get less complaints because we know agents are resolving them all successfully at that first stage.
Absolutely, it's better for you, it's better for the agents, it's better for consumers. Everybody wins if that occurs. Just a bit of signposting. So we are sending out links, and I'm going to get the names absolutely right on this. So we, as part of your follow-up email today's webinar, you'll get a link to the TPO Complaints Handbook and a link to the TPO Codes of Practice. We, Fixflo, has also written a guide, so a checklist and guide on handling complaints around repairs and maintenance as judged against the TPO Code of Practice on repairs and maintenance. I'm not sure if that's in the follow-up email, but if it's not, we will do our best to get it in there as quickly as we can. Zoe, one of the questions that's come in, so we're on to the question section. Sorry, our Q&A function isn't working brilliantly well today, but we will muddle through. So Zoe, your sort of starting point was nobody wants to get a complaint against them, but you should seek to take the positives where you can. To what extent do you think that this has had a positive impact on your business internally, and have there been any consequential benefits to your landlord base as a result of having been through the complaints process?
I think it's too early to sort of comment on the landlord side of things, but I think what it did for me, I've got a relatively new team. I mean, and I think it helped me focus their minds in terms of what they should be doing as a team. Realistically, you don't want that to happen. You don't want to have to go through this sort of rigmarole to get to that point. But I think we did do a training session shortly after, and it sort of made them acknowledge and realise the importance of keeping those file notes rather than the boss just nagging them to do it. It did feel, you know, it sort of focused them in terms of just understanding from my point of view, you know, what the implications are and the time it takes. You know, it took several hours to get the file together, and I'd say I'm pretty organised. So if you were a little less organised office, could take you, you know, a considerable amount of time. So for me, it was just refocusing and refreshing and just understanding that we do need to keep regularly training and regularly, if we weren't audited by Belvoir, auditing our offices to make sure that we have got that documentation when we need it. You know, we're very open with our complaints procedure. We have it displayed. I mean, we don't have visitors very often at the moment, but we have it displayed in the office, and it is, you know, we even have the Ombudsman's information to hand, so people could just pick it up if they wanted to, pre-COVID, obviously. But yeah, that, you know, we've always been open about that side of things as well. But I think for me, it was just galvanising the team, you know, in a positive way.
Brilliant, thank you. And you've referred to the complaints process, the internal complaints handling complaints procedure a few times. You mentioned that you use the ALA Property Mark one. Are you able to signpost members? So some of them have asked questions about where they can access that. And then as a follow-up to that, Siobhan, do you have any views on what would constitute an appropriate complaint if people are not ALA Property Mark members or choose not to use that process? Are there any steer you can give? So Zoe, over to you first.
Yes, what I'll do is I'll get the link off the website and I'll stick it in the quick Q&A part or something, or I'll send it to you, Raj, so you've got it. And hopefully that will help them find the way. It is, I think you have to download it off the website, but I'll find it and you amend it accordingly to your office. You put your details in. Just that, I don't want to say, but there are other, professional bodies and they have their own complaints procedures as well. So, and if you're part of a franchise group, I think you'll probably find they will be able to issue them. So you're not on your own. And even the Ombudsman might have something that they could offer, just to be clear that so everybody's not struggling to find a complaints procedure. There are other places available as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Siobhan, over to you. So what's your view of complaints procedures? What is an adequate complaints procedure and what's your expectations?
Yeah, so you can have a look at a template complaints procedure on TPO's website. We have that information there, and I think that's one of the things we'll provide in the link in the follow-up. Essentially, the sort of key things that we're looking for is the complaints procedure must be resolved end to end within 8 weeks. That's a requirement, and generally we're looking for 2 stages. So the person brings the complaint and receives that initial response, and then has the opportunity to respond again and have that response reviewed again, ideally by another person within the agency, preferably somebody more senior. And then there is the requirement that information about TPO, or it might be about PRS, depending on which scheme you're a member of, that the complaint can be escalated to if it's not resolved satisfactorily. So those are the fundamentals. But like Zoe said, there's lots of resources available, but there is for TPO members template procedure available on our website, and there are also template letters available. So those are kind of template letters that give you an idea of how to respond under those 2 stages. So that information is available as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And I guess staying with you, Siobhan, because you're most appropriate to answer this. There was a question raised about the number of times a decision can be reviewed or appealed, in effect, by a complainant. Could you just talk us through that part of the process? So is there a point at which they can no longer complain because it has been fully settled?
Yeah, so it's just once. You'll be pleased to know. So essentially what happens is an adjudicator will issue a proposed decision, and then either party, so that's agent or complainant, can make representations. They make those representations, they will then be considered, and a final ombudsman decision will be made. That's the final decision, and there isn't a further appeal process. That doesn't mean that complainants stop writing to us or will necessarily stop writing to the agent. Sometimes that does happen. It's rare, to be honest. Most people, once that final decision is made, they understand that's the end of the process, and we explain that really clearly. But obviously, sometimes if people are particularly dissatisfied with the decision, we will continue to receive correspondence, and we manage that appropriately and effectively depending on the circumstances.
Brilliant, thank you. And Zoe, a question specifically for you. So you're well known for your love of process and procedure and manuals and documentation and the like. To what extent did you choose to, or were you required to provide details of your internal business processes that supported the evidence gathering for the particular case?
I didn't have to. Obviously, I have an operations manual that is our processes. I didn't have to sort of produce that per se, but obviously by having that in place, it allowed me to be able to provide. It was more things like file notes and an audit trail that were crucial, and trying to prove things from several years ago. And obviously, if we hadn't made a file note about that, it would have been one word against another's. It's keeping copies of your emails within your CRM system so that you can revert back to them. I think one of the key things for me was as well is identifying with my team, if you like, headings. So for example, if it was an issue around maintenance, call it maintenance. Because if you've got to go back 6 years and filter every file note you've ever made on that particular property or that particular landlord or that particular tenant, you could have hundreds and hundreds of pages of file notes. So it's very, you want a clear identifier. I mean, with Fixflo, the maintenance is great because it's all on each job. But if it's anything else, any other sort of file note, or such a buddy called in and said, or such a buddy called in and said this, you want clear topics. So then when you filter your CRM, you can find that quite easily. Otherwise, it's a bit of a needle in a haystack type of thing. So didn't have to give them any detail of the processes, but having that process in place meant that it was easier to provide all the other information that was required. I don't know if that makes sense to the person that asked the question, but if not, just get in touch.
And I've just seen, Zoe, that you put the link to the Arla Property Mark website where the complaints procedure can be accessed. But again, we'll try and get that out to people as part of the follow-up email. Apologies to anybody whose questions have not been answered. The Q&A function today in Zoom seems to be going a bit haywire with questions disappearing, but hopefully today has achieved the core goal of demystifying the process and giving you some actionable tips to avoid complaints, and then if that's not possible, to handle them more effectively. Before we go, just a couple of housekeeping points. The first is, could you take 30 seconds, 10 seconds even at the end to provide some feedback on today's webinar. And if you have any suggestions on other topics that might be useful to you, please let us know. And Zoe, over to you. Is there anything else you would like to share with the audience as we wrap up?
Just a couple of things. I know Siobhan mentioned this at the outset when she went through the process. You could have an absolutely awesome outcome, but just remember the complainant, if not happy, has the right to appeal that decision and may well do that. So be ready for that as well, because that's, you may have to find new information or new evidence to, state your claim. And obviously, even after that, the complainant could take you to court. So again, I mean, obviously, if the Ombudsman's found in your favour, that's obviously going to be in your favour when you go to court. But there's still that option there that the complainant could do that. And then just my key thing is train your staff. Make sure you have the right processes in place, because it's crucial. We only realise this when something like this is happening or happened. And I think today for me was all about, if I can just help one person today, that's good for me. We've come out the other side of this, but I don't necessarily want everybody else to have to go through what I went through, because all right, I'm a strong character, but it isn't easy, because it just feel like a personal attack, and it isn't. But hopefully I can help somebody out there today, just to sort of focus their minds so they don't have to go through this.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much for giving up your time, Zoe. Siobhan, over to you. Anything that you would like to share as a wrap up for the audience?
I guess just a couple of things. So I'd just give that reminder that as an ombudsman scheme, we're impartial, and we intend to be open and approachable to both parties. So if you have a complaint that's come to TPO and you're not sure about a process, or you're not sure what to provide, we're as much there for agents as we are for complainants. So give us a call, send us an email. If you're not sure about anything, let us know, and we are happy to help you and to assist, and we can do that. The other thing I would say is just to flag the resources that are available on the website. I've flagged the complaints handling resources, but there's also some other guidance on topic specific issues, including issues arising from letting. So if you're dealing with a specific issue and you're not sure, has this met the code requirement? How would the Property Ombudsman look at that? There's some great guidance on there, and it's well worth a look. And we do work closely with the National Trading Standards team, and ensuring that our guidance is consistent with them, and also consistent with other organisations in the sector like the Deposit Protection Services and the PRS. So it's well worth having a look on that guidance if you're looking to resolve a complaint.
Brilliant. Thank you to everyone who's been part of today's webinar, everyone in the audience, to Zoe and Siobhan for giving up their time and sharing their insights. And hopefully there was some value in there for you in avoiding complaints or resolving them if they were to occur. Just signposting, if you would like to be kept up to date with these sorts of webinars or anything else from Fixflo, please follow us on all good social media channels. We are there. And if you have any suggestions on webinar topics that might be useful to you, or any feedback on the webinar series in general, please email research@fixflo.com. Everyone on today's webinar will receive a recording of the full thing. I appreciate that people are busy and may not have been able to attend the full live session. And our next webinar is on another form of dispute, so tenancy deposit disputes. Why are they still happening? We've got representation from the TDS, and it looks like someone's invented a time machine because there's a much younger looking Christian Byfield from the depository also attending. So please do sign up for that. Christian's insights, both as the head of a prop tech business looking to avoid disputes with deposits, but also as a leading agent in his market. He has hands-on experience. And we'll be able to share that with you. So thank you all very much for attending. Really grateful. A follow-up email with relevant links will be coming out together with a recording. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.